Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty heavy. Title IX. And specifically, how it all works when you've got sexual harassment allegations happening in schools. I mean, this isn't just like legal mumbo jumbo. We're talking about real students here, their lives, their well being. And here's the thing. We talked to Dr. Howie Knoff for this deep dive. He's like the expert witness in these cases. And he's noticed something kind of alarming. A lot of school administrators, even though Title IX is it's federal law, right? They're not exactly crystal clear on what they're supposed to actually do when these situations pop up. So that's where this deep dive comes in. We're going to break down those procedures, try to really understand, like, what's the emotional impact all this has on students, and get into this thing called secondary victimization and how to avoid making things worse.
Yeah, it's interesting. We sort of assume, right, that schools, they know the law backwards and forwards. But what Dr. Knopf is seeing out there on the ground suggests that's not always the case. And yet this is real-world stuff. These are actual students dealing with this.
Yeah.
So understanding Title IX, it's really about protecting their rights.
Absolutely. And it's not just about knowing the rules, right? It's about getting that human side of it, too.
Right.
But, okay, before we go too far, let's make sure we're all on the same page here. When we say sexual harassment in this whole Title IX context, what exactly are we talking about?
So that's where things get kind of interesting. Because Title IX, the way it defines sexual harassment, it's a lot broader than a lot of folks realize. It's not just, limited to assault. It covers dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, even stuff happening online, like through social media.
So like cyberbullying and things like that could fall under Title IX.
Absolutely. And here's a key point. Even if a report of sexual harassment, even if it's not, like, proven right away, the school district, they still have certain responsibilities right off the bat.
See, and you'd think, well, obviously they got to take it seriously, right? But Dr. Knopf has seen cases where schools try to, I don't know, sweep things under the rug, especially if they think, oh, maybe this accusation won't really hold up.
And that's exactly why understanding your rights and the school's obligations, that's so important. So let's talk process. Once a report is made, what steps does the school have to take?
So that's where that step-by-step procedure really comes in. First thing, any school employee, anybody who learns about a potential Title IX issue, whether it's a direct report from a student, a rumor they overhear, anything, they are legally required to tell the district's Title IX coordinator right away, like immediately. That notification kicks off the whole thing.
And it's important to emphasize, schools can't just pass it off to law enforcement and be like, well, the cops are on it. Nope. Title IX investigations are separate. They should happen at the same time as any police investigations, if those are happening.
So it sounds like this Title IX coordinator is kind of the point person for all this.
Yeah, absolutely essential role. So once they're notified, this coordinator, they'll meet with the person who made the report, explain the whole process, talk about their options, like whether they want to file a formal complaint. They'll also talk about supportive measures, which aren't punishments. It's stuff the school can do to make the student feel safer, more supported, like changing their schedule or providing counseling.
It sounds like the focus is on taking care of the student no matter what, regardless of whether a formal complaint is filed or not.
Right, and that's huge. It's the student's decision whether to file a formal complaint. Nobody at the school can make that choice for them.
But what if a formal complaint is filed? What happens then?
Then it gets a little more, official. The Title IX coordinator might decide they need an independent investigator, either someone from the district or an outside expert. That investigator gathers evidence, talks to witnesses, puts together a report with their findings.
Okay, so we've talked about the steps, the players involved, but now I think we got to shift gears a bit and really think about the human side of this whole thing. It's easy to get stuck on the procedures, right? But we can't forget that we're talking about real students going through something incredibly difficult.
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to talk about the emotional impact of sexual harassment. And the research is very clear on this. The effects, both psychologically and sociologically, can be significant.
So can you paint us a picture? Like, what are some of the ways this might actually impact someone who's been through this?
We're talking about a whole range of tough emotional responses.
Mm-hmm.
Fear, anxiety, shame, guilt, anger, depression. Many victims have symptoms of PTSD, intrusive memories, nightmares, flashbacks. They might even turn to self-harm.
It's just heartbreaking, and I can only imagine how hard it is to trust people after something like that.
Yeah, trust issues are incredibly common, which can make it so hard to form healthy relationships of any kind, whether it's friendships, romantic relationships, even trusting teachers. It affects their entire social and academic life.
So, knowing all that, what's the most important thing for school administrators to keep in mind about the impact this can have on a student?
The key is, a student's behavior might completely change after experiencing harassment. They might withdraw from friends, their grades might tank, or they might start acting out. And the thing is, instead of jumping to disciplinary action, right, administrators need to look at these behaviors through a mental health lens and ask themselves, what's really going on here?
That's such a good point. It really highlights why it's so important to bring in mental health professionals early on, not just for the students directly involved, but anyone who might be affected.
Exactly. And this leads us to another layer we need to unpack: secondary victimization. This is where a victim experiences further trauma, not from the original harassment, but from how people or institutions react to their experience.
Okay, break that down for us. What are some examples of how that might happen in a school setting?
Imagine a student bravely reports harassment, right? And then they're met with disbelief or even victim blaming from classmates, or even worse, from adults. Or picture a situation with a Title IX investigation. It's handled so poorly that the student feels re-traumatized by the process itself.
So it's not just about having procedures in place, it's about how those procedures are carried out and how the student is treated every step of the way.
Exactly. And remember, so many victims, they already feel powerless, vulnerable after what they've been through. The whole point of the Title IX process should be to empower them, to help them regain some sense of control, not to make them feel more victimized.
This idea of control is really interesting. Are you saying that a poorly handled Title IX process can actually make those feelings of powerlessness even worse?
Absolutely. It creates this vicious cycle where a student who's already been harmed feels betrayed by the very system that's supposed to be there to protect them.
This is really starting to make sense. But before we get too far into it, I think we should clarify something that might be confusing for people. The difference between Title IX and what happens with law enforcement. Like, how do those two things relate to each other?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
They both deal with sexual harassment,
Mhm.
right? But their focus is totally different. Title IX, it's all about what's going on in the school itself. It's about addressing the behavior of the person accused of harassment and making sure the student who reported it, that they can keep learning, keep participating in school without fear. The criminal justice system, on the other hand, it's focused on punishment, legal consequences.
So they can run at the same time, but they're operating under totally different sets of rules and objectives.
That's exactly it. And what Dr. Knopf has observed is that the Title IX process actually has some real advantages. It tends to move more quickly. There's a better chance of a clear resolution. And for the students involved, it can feel a lot more relevant to their lives, since it's directly dealing with their school environment.
So we've covered a lot, but I think it's good to pause for a second and pull out some key takeaways here, especially if you're, a student or a parent maybe dealing with this right now.
For sure. I mean, it's clear Title IX is there to protect students, but sometimes the details can feel overwhelming. So let's break it down. First thing to remember: if you or someone you know is experiencing sexual harassment at school, you're not alone, and it's super important to report it to that Title IX coordinator, like ASAP.
That sounds simple enough, right? But knowing all the stuff we've talked about, the emotional toll, the fear of not being believed, I bet that first step is really tough.
Yeah, you're right. It takes a lot of courage to come forward, and that's why it's so crucial for schools to create a culture where students feel safe enough to do that.
So what does that kind of culture actually look like on a school?
It means having those clear policies, procedures, definitely. But it goes deeper than that. It's about fostering an environment of respect, open communication, and having those conversations about sexual harassment in age-appropriate ways, of course, like woven into the curriculum from a young age.
So starting early, building that foundation.
Exactly. And it's not just the students. It's all school staff, teachers, administrators, even bus drivers. Everyone needs training on how to recognize and respond to those potential signs of harassment.
You mentioned recognizing signs. What should adults be looking out for?
It can be subtle. Things like changes in behavior, withdrawal, grades dropping suddenly, even physical cues like anxiety or distress. Those can all be red flags.
So it's about being tuned into those subtle changes and making sure students know they can trust adults to listen.
For sure. And when a student does confide in an adult, that adult's response is so important. Dr. Oboff talks about this, a victim's first disclosure. It's almost like a test. They're seeing if they can trust this person with their experience.
So if they feel dismissed or like they're not taken seriously in that first conversation, they might not reach out for help again.
Exactly. That's why active listening is so huge. Validating their feelings, letting them know they did the right thing by speaking up.
So besides that education and training, what other things can schools do, like structurally, to help prevent harassment?
Well, like we said, having those clear policies and procedures for reporting and investigating, that's non-negotiable, and they can't be buried in some handbook nobody reads.
Right, no more fine print.
Exactly. They need to be front and center, accessible to everyone. Students, parents, staff, everyone needs to know what to do, where to go for help.
And this goes back to what Dr. Knopf was talking about. Sometimes even the people in charge aren't clear on what Title IX requires.
Right, and that's why that ongoing training for staff is so important. Everyone needs to be on the same page about their responsibilities
Yeah.
and how to handle these situations the right way.
And, we got to talk about the elephant in the room. Technology. So much harassment these days, especially with teens. It's happening online. How can schools even address that?
You're telling me it's a huge challenge. Schools need crystal clear policies about cyberbullying, online harassment, and those policies need to be enforced just as seriously as any offline ones.
I can see how that gets complicated, though. Like, where's the line between what the school can do and a student's personal life online?
Oh, for sure, it can get messy. But it's not impossible. Schools can teach about responsible digital citizenship, monitor school-issued devices for anything inappropriate, and work with parents to set those clear expectations about online behavior.
So it's like a team effort.
Exactly. Education, monitoring parental involvement. It's about making it clear that those same rules of respect apply, whether you're face-to-face or online.
All right, so we've been focusing a lot on what schools can do, which is obviously super important. But let's zoom in on the student and their family. Like, what specific steps should they keep in mind if they're going through this?
Yeah, good point. It can feel so overwhelming when you're in it. So one of the most important things to remember is that the student, the one who reported the harassment, they have rights and options
Yeah.
throughout the whole process.
Okay, so what are some examples of those rights?
They can ask for those supportive measures we talked about, decide whether or not to file a formal complaint, and they can have an advocate, a support person with them during any meetings or hearings. They don't have to go through this alone.
And what if a formal complaint is filed and the investigation finds that, yeah, harassment did happen? What kind of outcome can the student expect then?
So if the investigation says the respondent is responsible, the school has to take disciplinary action. Could be anything from a warning to suspension, even expulsion. Depends on how serious it was.
Yeah.
And they also have to take steps to help the student who reported it so they can get back to school, keep learning without any barriers.
So there are real consequences for the person responsible and real support for the person who was harmed.
That's the goal. Yeah. The whole Title IX process, it should be fair and equitable for everyone, but always with the safety and well-being of the whole school community in mind.
We talked about emergency removal before. Can you explain that a bit more? Like, when would that happen? How does it work?
Sure. So emergency removal, it's something schools can use to remove a student right away if there's a serious, immediate threat to the safety of others. It's not a punishment exactly. It's a safety measure while the investigation is going on.
So it's about prioritizing safety.
Right. But it can't just be done randomly. They have to carefully assess the situation.
Yeah.
And the student being removed, they still have rights. They get a chance to respond.
Makes sense. It's so interesting to hear about Dr. Knopf's work. As an expert witness, are there any cases he's worked on that really highlight how all this plays out in the real world?
You know what's fascinating? Dr. Knopf, he sees this disconnect between the law as it's written and how it's actually being used in schools. He's noticed this pattern where schools either don't fully grasp what they're supposed to do or they're actually trying to dodge their Title IX responsibilities.
That's kind of scary, honestly. Can you give us an example? Like, what does that look like in practice?
So, in one case, a school administrator, they did their own investigation into a sexual harassment report, decided nothing happened, and they never even told the Title IX coordinator.
Whoa, so they basically just skipped the whole process.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big violation of Title IX. By not reporting it, the school not only failed to follow federal law, but they might have denied that student their rights and any support they needed.
It really shows how important it is to have that designated Title IX coordinator, someone who knows what they're doing and who's easy for students and staff to reach.
Couldn't agree more. That coordinator is key to making sure the school is doing what it's legally required to do, and that everyone's rights are protected.
We talked earlier about secondary victimization, and I want to dig into that a little more. It seems like it can happen in ways people don't even realize.
Oh, absolutely. Secondary victimization can be so sneaky. It's not always intentional or obvious, but it can be just as harmful to the victim.
Can you give us an example? Like, What would that more subtle kind of secondary victimization look like?
Okay, so let's say a student reports sexual harassment.
Mm.
The school follows the procedures,
Right.
right? But they're just not very sensitive in how they interact with the student. Maybe they use dismissive language, or they don't offer any emotional support, or they say things that even unintentionally make the student feel like it's their fault.
So even if the school isn't trying to hurt the student, their actions can still contribute to that feeling of shame, isolation, distrust.
Exactly. And that's why awareness is so crucial. Everyone in the school, teachers, administrators, counselors, they need to be trained to recognize and avoid those subtle forms of secondary victimization.
It's about building that culture of empathy, where victims feel believed and supported.
Absolutely. The goal is to make sure the whole Title IX process is trauma-informed. It needs to acknowledge the impact sexual harassment has on victims and make their healing and recovery a top priority.
Okay, this has been so helpful. Before we wrap up, what's the most important message you want our listeners to take away from all this?
The big takeaway is that creating a safe and supportive learning environment for every student. It's a shared responsibility. It's not just on the school, it's on all of us. Parents, educators, students, the whole community. Understanding Title IX and advocating for it to be used the right way. That's something we can all do.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not just about checking boxes and following the rules. It's about really creating that culture where every student feels safe, respected, and knows they can actually speak up if something's wrong. We've talked a lot about responding to harassment, but what I'm really curious about is prevention. What can schools actually do to proactively prevent these situations from even happening in the first place?
Right, that's the million-dollar question. And the good news is there's a lot schools can do, proactively, I mean. And it all starts with education.
Okay, tell me more about that. What kind of education?
We got to start young. Teaching kids about healthy relationships, consent, respecting boundaries, in ways they can understand, obviously. At each age, right? This can't be like a one-time assembly or one chapter in a textbook. It has to be an ongoing conversation. Part of the curriculum, all grade levels.
So it's about laying that groundwork early on, building that foundation of respect.
Exactly. And it's not just the students. All school staff, teachers, administrators, support staff, everyone needs training on how to recognize and respond to potential signs of harassment.
You keep mentioning recognizing signs. Can you give us some specifics, like what are some red flags adults should be watching for?
It can be subtle stuff, changes in behavior. Maybe a student becomes withdrawn, grades drop suddenly, or they're showing physical signs of anxiety, stress. Those can all be signs that something's not right.
So it's about being observant, being tuned in to those changes, and creating an environment where students feel comfortable coming to an adult if they need to.
Exactly. And when a student does come forward, that adult's response, it's make or break. Dr. Knopf says this a lot. That first time a victim tells their story, it's like a test. They're seeing if they can trust this adult.
So if they're met with disbelief or a dismissive attitude, they're less likely to try again.
Exactly. So listening actively, validating their feelings, reassuring them that they did the right thing by speaking up. That's all crucial.
Okay, so we've got education, training. What about policies? What are some structural things schools can put in place to help prevent harassment?
Having clear policies and procedures for reporting and investigating, non-negotiable. And they can't be buried in some handbook nobody reads.
Right. No more fine print.
These policies need to be easy to find, easy to understand. For everyone, students, parents, staff, everyone needs to know what to do, where to go for help.
Which takes us back to what Dr. Knopf has seen, where sometimes even administrators aren't totally sure what Title IX requires of them.
Right, and that's why ongoing training is so important. For all staff, everyone needs to be on the same page about the law and their responsibilities.
Okay, and we can't forget about technology. So much of this is happening online now, especially with teens. How do schools even begin to deal with that?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge for schools today. They need clear policies about cyberbullying, online harassment, and those policies need to be enforced just as seriously as offline ones.
I can see how that gets tricky, though. Where's the line between the school's authority and a student's personal life online?
Oh, for sure. It's a tough one. But it's not impossible. Schools can teach about responsible online behavior. They can monitor school-issued devices and work with parents to set expectations about what's okay online, what's not okay.
So it's a group effort.
Exactly. Education, monitoring, parental involvement. It's about making it clear that those same rules of respect apply online, just like they do in person.
All right, this has been incredibly insightful. As we wrap up here, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
The bottom line is this. Preventing sexual harassment in schools. It's not just about following the law, it's about doing what's right. Every student deserves to feel safe and respected at school, and it's on all of us to make that happen.
I love that. It's not just rules and regulations. It's about protecting kids, creating a space where they can thrive.
Exactly. And by working together, schools, families, communities, we can create those environments where every student feels safe and empowered.
That's a great place to leave it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Title IX and sexual harassment in schools. You can find more information and resources on our website. And until next time, keep learning and keep asking those tough questions.